There once was a girl, Alma, who lived in a small house on the edge of a small town next to a large, dark forest. There had been many people there when she was very young, bustling around the town, filling the air with shouts and laughter. But now it was just her and a handful of families left eking out a meager living. She lived with her grandmother, who she called Mimi, a surly old southern woman who refused to die. Each day they would go out and tend the fields that promised more than they could deliver. The woods loomed on the edge of their fields. Sometimes she could hear what sounded like a far-off whistle of one of those friends long since gone. Tilly, a thin, wiry girl with a daisy always tucked behind her ear, who loved mischief and making Alma laugh until she couldn't breathe. She could hear her calling in her jaunty voice, promising good times and better company. She would swear she could see the shadow, or even the outline of Tilly, but not quite, wavering, running and playing just beyond the tree line. But Alma always pushed back the voice and ripped her eyes away from the wood, getting back to tending the soil. Each night Alma would sit with her Mimi by the hearth and listen to her stories as they made their supper. Sometimes her tales would be of when she was a young lady growing up in the town not too dissimilar to this one. But more often than not, it was tales about the others. "Watch yourself, child," she would rasp. "Each night the others come to take the young, the innocent. They lure into the forest with lovely things and soft-spoken words, and then take, leaving them foolish enough to listen, to follow, wandering round them dark woods, empty and wanting. For what? Couldn't tell you. But I think they want what was taken from them. They want to leave the endless twilight of them woods and find the sun again." After her tales were told and the fire died down, Mimi would draw the curtains and settle Alma into her bed, warning once again to never venture into the woods and to always watch for the signs of the others. "'Member, if you're hearing something, no you didn't." Alma would feel the fear of the twilight, of the unknown, of the wood. However, a part of her was always left wishing she could see what really happened to all those people who vanished from the village. As they worked on dyeing fields each day, her eyes and her mind would wander to the edge of the forest, and she would dream of walking into the woods and coming out with all of the forgotten friends. The sun had set long ago. Alma lay awake in bed, the full moon throwing gloomy outlines around her room, wishing sleep would come when she heard a whisper from the window. It floated on the breeze and drifted past her ear, leaving her wondering if she had heard it at all. Alma stirred in the covers and rolled over, trying to press it out of her mind, as her Mimi always told her. Again, the voice slipped past her, this time louder. Tilly calling her name, pulling her to the woods. Alma sat up, walked to the window, pulled back the curtains, and closed it, locking it tight. Taken aback, Alma returned to her bed and settled back into an uneasy feeling as if eyes were everywhere. Pulling the covers over her head to escape the eyes, the voices called her again. She pulled the blankets tight over her head.
"Alma, your Mimi's sleeping,"
the voice called.
"Let's dance in the moonlight and sing."
It called her in Tilly's voice, but not fully. It had an odd quality to it, like two people were using the same throat. Her, Tilly, and the others, whose voice ran deeper, full of blood and deep grasping pain. Over and over it called to her, pounding its voice into her ears, threatening to burst them as she tried to ignore it. Alma dug deeper into her bedding, pressing her hands to her ears as hard as she could, trying to drive the voices away. With each call, it grew deeper, more and more other than Tilly. Soon, it was nothing more than a wrenching howl, clawing at her. Before Alma had realized, the stirring, wanting voice had faded away, and she woke to her room full of light. Not the cold light of the moon, but the warm glow of the sun. She pulled the covers off and went to the window. Deep claw marks scored the outside of her sill. Alma pressed into the window, trying to press the voice out with it. It was time to tend the fields. She spent her day watering, weeding, and fertilizing the fields with manure. It was long, hard work, but her mind was not in it. It was in the woods. Her thoughts flitted from one tree to the next, Tilly pulling her eyes and mind deeper into the copse. Where was she? Why was she gone? What is living just past the light of the fields, in the shadow of those looming trees? She ran through the memories of last night, trying to pull from the voice any meaning of where her friend was and why her voice was stolen. That night, like every night, Mimi told her stories, and like most nights, she talked of the others, cautioning Alma, and like every night, Alma sat working on mending as Mimi made supper, but could only think of the voice, its ripping strains, casting shadows over her mind and pulling at her heart. After supper had been made and eaten, and all the stories told, Alma went to bed. She lay in bed. This time, she waited. She waited for the voice to return. She was going to have her answers. The voice did not come. Alma lay awake all night waiting. Her room stayed as silent as it had before. Only the wind called its soft moaning howls throughout the house, as it did most nights. So it was, night after night. Alma lay awake, waiting for the call, and each night she was met with silence. After a while, her mind moved on to other things, as minds are wont to do. It wasn't until the next full moon cast its lopsided silhouettes around Alma's room that she heard the voice again. It danced past her ear and through her hair. Its hushed promise of fun and friends. Alma awoke. Her eyes opened, pulling her too quickly from her dreams. She sat up, her heart pounding. The voice whispered past her again. Alma rose from her bed and walked slowly to the window. Tilly cooed at her, telling her of what fun they will have and the mischief they will bring. Quietly, Alma slid from her window, her bare feet landing on the cold, hard ground. The wind blew through her thin linen sleeping gown. She padded across the field that separated her house from the forest, following the voice. The wood loomed large over as she stood on the knife's edge of where her field stopped and the wild began. She wavered back and forth, Tilly and the other's voice luring her, the questions running through her mind, and the wind pushing at her back. Mimi's voice rang in her ears, stopping her cold. It pulled her back, reminding her of what was real and safe. To all others, Alma stood motionless, staring into the woods. With a quickening step, she slid into the trees. Her steps so light they sounded like leaves running across each other. She would find Tilly. The voice guided her deeper, deeper, ever deeper. The warmth slipped from her as she walked on, the trees pulling her life from her. The voice wrapped its knobbly hands around her heart, clenching as to not let her stray away from the well-worn path through the woods. "Where's Tilly?" she asked, her voice almost a death rattle.
"Just a bit deeper,"
the other called back. Alma could feel the ice storming through her body, making it harder and harder to move. But still she pressed on. As the chill glassed over her eyes, Alma saw a silvery light pass between the trees. As a voice urged her forward, she turned her head, and the light shone again, fluttering past a small crooked tree, It shrunk the shape of a man stumbling forward. Alma stopped. The light filled her eyes. As it did, the other shapes filled what Alma thought were empty spaces between trees, each leaning on two malformed trunks, coming together and twisting forward, as if marching in lurching steps into the fathomless darkness of the wood. Tilly's voice changed, becoming more other than Tilly. It yelled to her, clawed at her, tried to drag her on to the center of the wood, but the light was beguiling. It called, not with a voice, but with the warmth of spring nights filled with laughter. As it drew closer, Alma could see the wavering form of a multicolored moth, its wings gilded in silvery moonlight. It sang to the deepest part of Alma. It flitted right before her, the scent drifting from its wings of almond nuts and autumn leaves. The light of nights spent with friends, watching stars. Alma reached for the moth, her fingers nearly cracking with cold. Warmth seeped in and quieted her creaking joints. The voice, ragged, digging its fingers into her heart, wrenched her away. Alma stumbled to the ground, jagged rocks cutting into her all-too-cold skin, her blood burning as it spilled onto the ground. The moth slipped past her eyes again, as it trailed away from her, following a gentle winding path away from the voice. Alma rose, and as she stood, she swayed back and forth, the voice twisting her insides. Painfully she turned, following the streaking silvery light. As she walked behind the moth's wings, her limbs warmed and the voices died down, almost to a whisper before rising up again, ripping at her insides, pulling her down. Each time Alma would turn to the moth, and the voice would almost whimper as she pulled herself up, following tree by tree behind her gilded courtier. The gentle fading light of the moth's wings laid out a winding path, pirouetting through the forest, its light filling Alma with more warmth, feeding her with what the trees had taken. As she pushed farther and farther from the voice, the knobbly hand around her heart loosened, its once wrenching grasp reduced to a pointed hold before slipping away, driven off by the light. Soon the twisting path she followed, left by the moth, began to brighten. Its silvery wings became translucent. Alma could see the dawn breaking in the sky, not too far away from where she stood, the moth's form becoming wavering like an old sun-bleached leaf left in water. The glittering form of the moth alit itself on the branch of a tree just inside the woods. Its twisted form resembled the spinning shape of a wiry girl, dancing in the dawn. The golden red light filled its spindly branches with 1,000 shimmering silver leaves, its base covered in daisies. "I found you." Alma's voice came out in a gentle, hoarse sob. As the sun pushed its way fully into the sky, Alma pushed through the tree line, back to where she had started, her small home feeling much bigger than it had just the night before.